Good morning, afternoon, everyone. My name is Adebayo Oladmejikwam, and together with me here is my teammates Adegun and Yola Esther from Lagos, Nigeria. We are proud to represent Group 3, the negative team, in today's debate. The motion before us today asks, should premarital genetic testing be a legal requirement? Should premarital genetic testing be made legally mandatory for all couples seeking marriage licenses? Our answer is a firm and principled no. We are not here to dismiss the value of genetic science. We celebrate it. But there is a vast difference between offering people access to genetic testing and forcing them to submit to it as a condition of marriage. Today, we'll show you exactly why that line must never be crossed. Good day, Mr. Chairman, panel of judges, accurate timekeepers, co-debaters, and my highly esteemed audience. We stand on the negative side of these debates, representing ethics, autonomy, and human rights. We strongly oppose making premarital genetic testing a legal requirement. We acknowledge that genetic disorders are a real concern. However, compulsion is never the answer in a civilized society. Freedom of informed choice is what separates ethical governance from authoritarian control. The question is, should governments make premarital genetic testing legally mandatory? Our position is negative. Now, let me be clear about what we support and what we oppose. We support voluntary genetic counseling and testing, where couples choose freely to learn about their genetic health. We oppose mandatory testing, where the government uses the force of law to require you to hand over your genetic information before you are even allowed to get married. That distinction between choice and coercion is the heart of this entire debate. Marriage is recognized as a fundamental human right in Universal Declaration of Human Rights, in national constitutions, and in international law. No government should turn that right into a genetic checkpoint. When the state says you may only marry if you first give us your DNA, that is a genetic-based discrimination, very, very plain and simple. Today, we are going to demonstrate that mandatory testing violates your fundamental human rights, that it creates discrimination and stigma, that it is impractical and unfair, especially in resource-limited settings like Africa, that it echoes the dark history of eugenics, and better alternatives already exist that can achieve health goals without any coercion. Now, we'll begin with our constructive arguments. Marriage and reproduction are among the most personal decisions a human being can make. They belong to the individual, not the state. Forcing someone to give a biological sample, their DNA, to give you their biological sample that contains their DNA as a condition for getting married is a direct violation of bodily autonomy. International law is very clear. You have the right to control what happens to your body, and here's the reality. Even if a couple knows they carry a genetic risk, they may still choose to get married to each other. They have that right. And the state cannot say, oh, you may not marry unless you comply with our genetic requirements. That is not governance. That is overreach. Mandatory testing doesn't just violate rights in theory. It causes real harm to real people. Now imagine you and your partner are in love, ready to build a life together. Then the government test labels one of you a carrier. Then suddenly your family starts to panic. Your community whispers, and engagement collapses not because of who you are, but because of a genetic marker you were born with. Now, this happens often in communities already battling stigma around diseases like sickle cell. Mandatory testing would pour fuel on a fire that already burns too hot, and the data doesn't even stay private. Life insurance companies, even under laws like GINA, can still legally deny coverage based on genetic risk. And employers in countries without strong protections can use that to screen people out, screen their employees out. And this is not even hypothetical. It is a documented reality. Genetics does not exist in a vacuum. It lives within culture, communities, and faiths. For many devoted families, Christians, Muslims, and others, marriage is a sacred covenant. Children are seen as gifts from God, not outcomes to be screened before they even exist. Now, forcing genetic testing on such families is not just a legal overreach, it is a spiritual one. And what happens when people feel their values are being violated? They disengage and they resist. They lose trust in medical institutions and also the government. Beyond faith, even medically mandatory testing causes psychological harm. Being labeled a genetic risk without adequate counseling can cause serious anxiety, shame, and trauma. Feelings people did not even ask for and they do not even deserve in the first place. Let's say the government mandates this testing tomorrow. Does that guarantee better health outcomes? I guess not. And here's why. A couple who test positive as carriers of a condition may still choose to get married. And the test result alone changes nothing if the couple doesn't even understand what it means. Now think about cystic fibrosis. If a couple tests positive as carriers, each pregnancy carries a 25% risk of that disease. But does that mean, and that also means 75% of their pregnancies will be perfectly healthy? Without proper counseling, they may panic unnecessarily or even make reproductive decisions based on fear rather than facts. And who will counsel them? In Nigeria, in Ghana, in Cameroon, genetic counselors are extremely scarce. Mandatory testing without mandatory counseling is not healthcare, it will cause chaos. Now, let's talk about what happens to your genetic data once the government has it. Your DNA doesn't just reveal your health risks, it reveals your parent risks, your siblings' risks, your children's risks before they are even born. One data breach doesn't harm one person, it potentially harms an entire family. And laws can change. Even in Europe, which has the world's strongest data protection framework, genetic data is treated with extraordinary caution there. And in Nigeria and in many other African nations, equivalent protections do not yet exist. We are not here just to oppose, we are here to offer a better alternative. In Austria, France, and several other nations, they offer voluntary premarital genetic counseling, freely available, properly resourced, culturally sensitive, and the uptake is very high. Why? Because where people are informed and respected, they choose wisely. And this is exactly what we are advocating for. Genetic literacy in schools, accessible counselors in clinics, free or subsidized voluntary testing, community engagement with religious and cultural leaders, strong anti-discrimination laws to protect those who do the tests, and this will give us same health outcomes, zero coercion, and it builds more trust and gives us better results. That is the path forward. Now, the affirmative team will tell you mandatory testing prevents genetic diseases. Now, let me explain that claim. Voluntary counseling achieves the same prevention goals, and studies have confirmed it. When couples receive proper information and guidance, most willingly choose to test. No force is required, no coercion. And think about the logic here. The affirmative is essentially saying genetic testing is good, therefore it must be mandatory. But that reasoning is flawed. Eating vegetables is good, but should we mandate what you eat? Pain relief is good, should we force it on you? Something being beneficial does not justify making it compulsory, and especially when a less coercive option achieves the same results. Mandatory testing is unnecessary. The affirmative may compare mandatory genetic testing to vaccinations or blood screening. Now, let me explain why the comparison fails. Public health mandates are only legitimate when they meet three constitutional principles. Number one is necessity. Is this measure even necessary? No. Voluntary counseling achieves the exact same outcome. The second one is proportionality. Do the benefits outweigh the right violations? Of course not. We're talking about false DNA disclosure here, privacy violations, discrimination risks for modest achievable health benefits. Thirdly, we have less restrictive alternatives. Do they even exist? Yes. We have options like voluntary testing, public education, and accessible counseling. The affirmative may also point to countries that have implemented mandatory genetic testing programs. Now, let's be precise about this. Very few countries in the world mandate pre-marital genetic testing. Most advanced democracies rely on voluntary programs, and the handful of countries with mandatory programs, they face significant criticism from international human rights organizations. Other countries do it is not the moral argument. It's not even a moral argument. It is a logical fallacy. We do not judge policies by how many countries adopted them. We judge them by whether they are just. And when we ask what defines success, success cannot only mean disease reduction, it must also mean human rights were being respected, discrimination is absent, public trust was preserved, and access is equitable to everybody. And by those measures, mandatory testing fails everywhere it has been tried. The affirmative may also argue that preventing genetic diseases saves healthcare money in the long run. Now let's do the maths. Genetic testing costs between $500 and $2,000 per test. Universal mandatory testing for all couples seeking marriage licenses will cost billions. And in countries where the entire per capita healthcare spend is like $46 per year, as in Nigeria, what would that money otherwise buy? Is it malaria treatments? Is it tuberculosis drugs or vaccines for the children? These are diseases that kill people today, not in 20 years. Today, currently. Now, mandatory genetic testing would be a luxury spending decision, dressed up as a public health necessity, and it is the raw priority for our healthcare systems right now. The affirmative might also claim that mandatory testing empowers couples with knowledge. Let's be precise. Coerced information is not empowerment, it is surveillance. True informed decision making requires two important things: accurate information and the freedom to choose what to do with it. Mandatory testing provides only the first while stripping away the second. And without genetic counselors to interpret results which we don't have in sufficient numbers, couples receive raw data they may not even understand, and the carrier results might be misread as a disease diagnosis. And it will cause unnecessary panic, and the relationship will be torn apart just by misinformation. Voluntary counseling, when done properly, provides both information and choice, and this is what real empowerment looks like. Finally, the affirmative may say, oh, mandatory testing improves public genetic literacy. We respectfully disagree. Testing is not education. Telling someone their genetic status does not teach them genetics. Education does. And mandatory testing only reaches couples applying for marriage licenses. And that's just a narrow slice of the population. Genuine genetic literacy requires school curriculum, community campaigns, accessible public information, and things that reach everyone, not just a gated few. What so? Coerced testing breeds resentment. And if people feel their genetic privacy is being violated by the government, they are less likely to engage with genetics at all. And we risk creating that very resistance we are even trying to overcome in the first place. And the solution is education first. Testing follows informed choice, not the other way around. Ladies and gentlemen, we've taken you through 6 constructive arguments and 6 rebuttals. Let me leave you with this. We have demonstrated that mandatory premarital genetic testing violates your fundamental human rights to bodily autonomy, privacy, and the freedom to marry. We have shown that it creates discrimination and stigma, especially in our African countries, in our African communities. We have shown that it is impractical and inequitable, diverting precious healthcare resources from today's most urgent needs. And we've also demonstrated that it echoes the language and logic of eugenics, which states control over who may reproduce and under what genetic conditions. And we have offered you a better alternative, a better path, which is voluntary counseling, public education, accessible testing, and strong anti-discrimination protections. And the question is not whether genetic testing has value. Of course it does. The question is, does the government have the right to force you to hand over your DNA as a condition for exercising one of the most fundamental rights a human being possesses? Our answer on behalf of dignity, freedom, and justice is no. Vote negative. Thank you. We are ready to address any questions from the judges, the audience, or the affirmative team. Thank you.